Welcome back. Today's story filled with drama and unexpected turns. Hit like, subscribe, and let's jump in.
Emily sat at the kitchen table, her notes spread out in front of her. She'd gone over her speech again and again, hunting for mistakes, but there were none. Every argument and counterargument was right there, perfectly prepared. She felt confident, this speech couldn't fail. Winning wasn't guaranteed, but at least she wouldn't lose. Thinking about what was at stake made her smile. No, she couldn't risk it. Feeling satisfied with her words, she started planning how to present it. If she took her time explaining it to Nathan, he might understand her point. But that would also give him a chance to argue back, and after 18 years of knowing him, she was sure he'd win any debate. Slow wasn't an option. She had to go with her favorite approach, a strong, fast hit to get his agreement before he could overthink it. She needed his support, without it, nothing would work. That part was clear. Nervously, Emily stood up and pottered about the kitchen. This was to distract herself from the pain she knew she was about to inflict on her husband. He didn't in any way deserve it, but without it, she wouldn't get what she deserved. She had to do it. She assuaged her conscience by reminding herself that he had forced her into this corner where she had no choice, ergo, it was his fault. Emily looked around the kitchen, trying to remember the last time she'd been there alone on a weekday. It had to be at least 6 months. Up until then, it had always been her getting home first and greeting the kids when they got home from school. Why had that changed? Simple, his name was Lucas. Lucas was drafted in 10 months ago from another office as her boss. For the first month, they'd maintained a standard boss-employee relationship. That changed when he asked her to work late one day. After finishing the work, he thanked her by taking her out for dinner. They discovered they had much in common, although he was 6 years her junior and single. They shared many common interests, such as the arts, movies, and fashion. Slowly, the compliments about her work and eventually her looks increased. She was flattered, both as a proud employee and as a woman who was starting to worry about the effects of time on her attractiveness. Soon it became a regular thing, and within a month, all pretense of work was dropped, and they hung around after hours just talking, either at work or over coffee somewhere. Within another month, his complaints of being lonely or hating to eat by himself led her to skip dinner with her family and discreetly go to restaurants with him with increasing frequency. By 4 months in, that included movies and shows as well. It also included many weekends, while she showed him the out-of-town or the local sites. She covered it at home by saying there was a promotion in the offing and she wanted to stand out from the crowd, proud of putting in the extra hours. She was only slightly ashamed by this ruse, which was made worse by her husband, Nathan, fully supporting her newfound ambition. She knew it was wrong for a married woman to behave this way, but damn it, after 15 years of being a selfless mother, she deserved to do something for herself. A couple of hours a day when she was with Lucas, she felt appreciated and more alive. Sure, her husband, Nathan, said he appreciated her all the time, but there were only so many ways for him to say it. It had gotten stale over the years. When she increased her workload, Nathan had quietly stepped up and taken up the slack. After the 3rd time of him coming home to find the kids home alone, he voiced the opinion that he thought it inappropriate for their youngest, at 13, to be unsupervised. Emily was still embarrassed at how she'd reacted, yelling at him. If he wasn't comfortable with it, he could reduce his hours. She'd woken the next day to find him already gone to work at 4:30 a.m. That night, she came home to find him already there, helping the kids with their homework and with dinner started. With only a slight tremble in her voice, she thanked him for supporting her career. When her weekend work started, Nathan had risen again and taken over the main responsibility of entertaining the kids. Far from finding it a chore, he seemed to love it and rediscovered his purpose in life. The kids loved reconnecting with their dad, and much fun was had by all. Even their eldest, at 16, gave up some of his time hanging out with his mates to go places with dad and siblings. Until 3 months ago, Emily's relationship with Lucas had been purely platonic. Then, one Saturday, after a nice lunch and a shower of compliments, Lucas had suggested getting a hotel room for the afternoon. Emily had laughed at his joke before noticing, with dismay, he wasn't smiling. That had shaken her to the core. She quickly made her excuses and left. All the way home, she mentally cursed Lucas for endangering their friendship by trying to make it sexual. He should have known she would never cheat on her husband. Sunday at work was devastating for Emily. Lucas treated her coldly and professionally. By the end of the week, she was really missing him. There had been no deep and meaningful conversations, no lunches, and absolutely no compliments. Even though she had hung back after work every single day, she recognized that the compliments and other affirmations of her professional and womanly strong points had become very important to her ego. Sure, Nathan was attentive and complimentary, but it just wasn't the same. Two things happened that week that should have screamed obsession to Emily. The first was on Tuesday when she came home to a partially completed dinner. Nathan asked her to finish it while he picked their eldest up from football practice. When he returned, Emily was still sitting where she'd been when he left. Dinner was late, which triggered the first of their conversations. Nathan questioned whether the focus on work was worth it, in front of the children. Emily chewed him out, taking all her frustrations of being ignored by Lucas out on Nathan. She calmed down by the time they went to bed. She denied any problems when Nathan asked if they were okay, but before the conversation was even finished, Nathan saw her mind was focused somewhere else. Consequently, he didn't even try for intimacy. All the knockbacks were getting a little demeaning. On Thursday afternoon, Lucas came and apologized to Emily. He excused his behavior as being prompted by having close contact with such a beautiful, desirable woman and being lonely. Emily forgave him but reminded him that she was a married woman who intended to remain faithful to her husband. Lucas responded by asking Emily if any of her colleagues would be available to relieve his frustration. This triggered every possessive instinct within her. She quickly replied in the negative. They parted good enough friends, and she agreed to sneak off and take in lunch and a show the next day. The second obsession trigger occurred when Emily arrived home that Thursday night. Nathan and the kids were packing for a camping trip. When she asked what was going on, they replied this long weekend trip had been planned for a month. They all stared at her incredulously when she denied all knowledge of it. She simply didn't believe them when they reminded her little else had been talked about over dinner all week. In her opinion, they were unreasonable when they refused to reschedule for the following weekend, saying that this was the last long weekend before the weather turned cold. In the end, a disgruntled family left without her, and a very pissed-off Emily stayed home alone. Her only solace was that their absence gave her 3 days to make up with Lucas. It hit her hard when, after the show the next day, Lucas announced he was unavailable Sunday and Sunday. Emily tried to contact her family to meet them wherever they were, but they were obviously in a no-cell service area. Emily was still pissed off when they returned. She didn't want to lay into Nathan for not knowing where they had gone, just in case they told her and she hadn't listened. She turned him down for intimacy that night on the grounds she had to be fresh for work. Vague alarm bells went off in Emily's head when Nathan suggested that her ambitions were leading to her estrangement from her own family. By the time he recovered from the chewing out she gave him over this, she was back to planning her week with Lucas. She woke with a start before 2:30 a.m. It suddenly hit her what damage this weekend and the conversation the previous night were doing to her perfect marriage and family. She felt a chill at the thought of Nathan leaving and forcing her to raise the children on her own. This was nothing compared to the thought of losing the wonderful, loving, considerate man she'd chosen as a life partner. Vowing to cool her extramarital friendship, she snuggled up to her husband. He felt wonderful in her arms. She considered waking him up in that special way she used to when they were much younger, but decided against it. The poor man had to be up in less than 2 hours. Subconsciously, Nathan must have felt her intimate need, so he came up for a big hug when she walked in the door later that night. Back under Lucas's spell, by then Emily hardly returned it. This set the scene for the next month. Within a week, things with Lucas were back to normal. Her marriage and family were as well. However, it was the new normal, where the four of them laughed, joked, and interacted, while Emily distractedly sat outside it all, totally unaware of the worried looks Nathan threw her way. Many times a night, Nathan cracked and begged her to give up on the promotion. He reiterated his love for her and confessed his terror at the effect all this extra work was having on their family. Unfortunately, he couldn't have picked a worse day to bare his soul. Just that day, Lucas had finally re-announced his wish to take their friendship to the next level, subtly but firmly making their continued friendship contingent on her agreeing. Emily was very distracted. The thought of losing all those ego-boosting compliments made her shudder. As Nathan begged and pleaded, Emily was debating what to do. It was a complete no-brainer what would happen if it came down to a straight choice between Lucas and her husband. Nathan would win. But there wasn't a lot she wouldn't do to avoid making the choice. She needed both of them, one for her need for stability, the other to bolster her flagging early 40s ego. Long after her husband had lapsed into silence, Emily was using her considerable intelligence to find a risk-free solution. By 13:30 a.m., she had it. The very next night, she explained her plan to Lucas, reiterating she would never cheat on her husband. She laid it all out. She would lure Nathan into having a threesome, where Lucas would just happen to end up as the third wheel. The men had never met, so it would simply be a matter of seemingly choosing Lucas at random. If that worked, she'd work on a way of getting some solo time with Lucas later. With Nathan's blessing, it wouldn't be cheating. She did warn Lucas it would take a while to talk Nathan around and asked him to be patient. Lucas didn't reply immediately. He considered the one he'd already invested in this pursuit. He had complete faith that once her artificial line had been crossed, the floodgates would be open, and she would be his whenever he wanted her. If that was what he chose to do. Warning her, he wouldn't wait forever, he readily agreed. Emily was so grateful she didn't object when he kissed her properly for the first time. She drew the line after several minutes when he firmly cupped her left breast in his hand. Angry at her own excitement, she pushed his hand away, reminding him of her commitment to be faithful. They went to dinner. She wasn't particularly nervous about raising the subject with Nathan. They'd always been open and honest about their fantasies and had role-played more than a few over the years. She was too tired to raise it that night, preferring to masturbate after Nathan was asleep. The next night, the atmosphere just didn't feel right, so she again waited for Nathan to go to sleep. This time, as she masturbated, she couldn't help a small moan escaping her. Her imagined coupling with Lucas was just so hot. With a small amount of horror, she was interrupted by Nathan rolling towards her. "This is a bit unfair, isn't it?" "Why, what's unfair?" Emily asked, trying to seem casual. "You laying there pleasuring yourself after knocking me back for the last few months." Emily was shocked. Surely it couldn't have been that long. Has it really been that long, darling? Too bloody right. Since you started going for that promotion, you've either been too tired, too grumpy, or simply told me to bugger off when I tried to start something. Even feeling as chagrined as she did, Emily still recognized this was a golden opportunity to raise the subject she wanted to. She spent a few minutes justifying to herself the effect her obsession with Lucas was having on her marriage. Then she sought a way to open the conversation. She was so busy she didn't take note when Nathan sighed and turned away. Again, she realized bringing up the idea of a threesome after a 3-month drought might affect Nathan's ego. It might imply that he alone just didn't do it for her anymore. No, the safer path was to re-establish relations with Nathan first. She rolled toward him and tugged him to her. Once on his back, he began snoring. Emily was too embarrassed to even continue masturbating. She had to get this out of her system shortly before it did any damage to her marriage. Emily worried that until Lucas came into her life, there had been absolutely nothing wrong with her marriage or her sex life. After 2 days of inaction, Lucas was a little upset with Emily. The next day, she had to kiss him again to stop him criticizing her. This time, he behaved and didn't go for a grope. It did make her horny enough to tongue kiss Nathan when she got home and rub his groin while doing it. Nathan's eyes lit up. They didn't even wait for the kids to go to bed. As soon as dinner was over, they retired to the little outdoor shed Nathan had built to house their jacuzzi. It was his solution to maintaining a healthy sex life as their children got older. Once inside, Nathan attacked her. After her commenting on his impatience, Nathan defended himself by saying he didn't want to give her time to change her mind. Nathan was considerate as usual, but Emily only managed to hit her peak when she closed her eyes and remembered Lucas's bulge twitching against her leg that afternoon. The next morning, Saturday, Nathan woke her in that special way she used to love, with his tongue caressing her sex. He no doubt thought she put the pillow over her face to stifle her moans. In reality, even with her eyes closed, she had trouble pretending Nathan was Lucas. It was a pleasant but confusing experience for Emily. That night, she felt bold enough to broach the touchy subject with her husband. After complimenting his performance over the last 24 hours, she delicately raised that after so many years, they were getting a little stale, and she had become a bit obsessed with the idea of a threesome. With his open and honest outlook on life, Nathan immediately suggested they role-play it. This was going better than Emily had expected, so it was back to the jacuzzi after every session. They collapsed on the custom-provided mattress, exhausted. In fact, the renewed sex with Nathan almost made Emily give up her plan. By a week and a half into what she thought of as Nathan's conditioning period, Lucas was getting very impatient, and the compliments were definitely drying up. She found herself having to kiss him practically every day or two just to keep him interested. Eventually, even that wasn't enough, and she felt Lucas withdrawing again. She knew she had to advance her timetable. 2 days later, after another marathon session in the jacuzzi shed, Emily thought she finally had the courage to ask the question that this had all been leading up to. But Nathan beat her to it. "Darling, the last few weeks have been great. It's been a huge turn-on doing you while our guest licks you. Do you think you would lick her as well? How can we role-play that?" Emily recoiled in shock as she realized the last 2 weeks of what seemed like total connectedness had actually been a huge disconnect. "You think I want a threesome with another woman? Isn't that what this has all been about?" Nathan sounded genuinely confused. Emily realized they had never talked details. She couldn't blame him for the misunderstanding. "No, Nathan. I was thinking about another man." Emily realized there was no time like the present. Stealing her courage, she launched into her prepared speech. "Listen, honey, the last few weeks have been really exciting for me. Is there any chance we can think about doing it for real, with an actual man? I mean, they'd actually give this the serious consideration it deserves." Nathan thought for a moment and then responded. "Well, Emily, off the cuff, I'd have to say it would almost certainly be a bad move. I can't see any good coming from it. I thought the idea of a threesome with another woman turned us both on. I've got to tell you, the idea of you with another man does nothing for me." Emily tried to make him see things from her perspective. "What if it was really important to me?" Nathan sighed. "I'd have to think about it. I'm just thinking out loud, but the only way I would ever consider bringing in another guy would be if next time we invited another girl." "No, you wouldn't have to do anything with her." Emily was taken aback by his response. "No, I couldn't. I said no." Nathan, frustrated, replied, "The mere thought of you with another woman just makes me so angry." "Forget it, Emily. It's never going to happen." Emily heard the finality in his tone. There was no way he was going to consider it. She knew right then and there that her plans with Lucas were over. Lucas wasn't going to be pleased. She knew that he would criticize her for not trying hard enough, and sure enough, he snubbed her for the rest of the week. As expected, Lucas was not a happy camper. He criticized Emily for not trying hard enough, then snubbed her for the rest of the week. As usual, Emily took out her frustrations on Nathan. On Sunday, Lucas asked her to stay behind so they could talk. He seemed genuinely sad when he told Emily he could no longer stand being around such a beautiful woman who was sexually unavailable to him. Her husband had forced her into a position where she had to choose between them, and she had chosen her loser husband. He respected that, even though it hurt. He kissed her goodbye, asked her to remember him fondly, and knew she would understand their relationship had to return to a professional one. Then he turned to walk away. "Wait, Lucas," Emily called. He stopped and turned. "Give me another week, please." "What do you have in mind?" Emily asked. "I don't know, just give me a week to plan something." With another kiss, they parted. Emily was left feeling a mix of emotions. She was distracted and overwhelmed. Meanwhile, Nathan noticed how distant she had become, how distracted and cold she seemed. That weekend, Nathan thought about her hot and cold mood swings over the last few weeks and about her recent obsession with threesomes. Now, he had another thing to worry about: why had her lipstick been smeared when she came home late on Thursday? It was time to do some digging. Not having participated in any family activities over the weekend, giving her more time to think, Emily excitedly cornered Lucas after work on Sunday. His eyes lit up as she explained her plan halfway through. He interrupted. "You know, Emily, he may want something in return for this." "Well, there are things I'm willing to give him and things that are not negotiable. We'll have to see. Just remember, sweetheart, if at the end of the day he says no, I will give up our plans altogether." "I understand," Lucas said, his tone a little resigned. "But if he does say no, it'll be a missed opportunity." Emily spent all of Tuesday and Tuesday at work, planning her speech. She started with the basic premise that whatever she did had to be risk-free. It couldn't possibly endanger her marriage and family. She likened it to playing poker. She'd won a $900 pot and didn't want to risk it. She wanted to lock that in a time-delayed safe so even she couldn't access it. Then, she could continue playing, knowing she could win another $900, but even if she lost, she still had the original. On Tuesday night, Lucas took her to dinner for a full dress rehearsal. After the main course, he told her to give him her best shot. "Well, Lucas, I've decided to hit him hard and fast tomorrow night. I'll start by reminding him how much I love him. Lay it on thick about the kids. You know how I look forward to their graduations, attending their weddings, and grandkids' christenings. Then, I'll remind him about the plans we've talked about for our retirement." Emily's mind drifted at this point, and Lucas rolled his eyes. "Typical woman," he muttered under his breath. "She launches straight into the emotive stuff. That would work brilliantly with another woman. They never seemed to realize men were far less emotive and more rational. Are you listening, Lucas?" "Of course, Emily," he replied, suppressing a smirk. Well, after that, I'll remind him that I gave him an opportunity to participate in me having some harmless fun, but he rejected it. I'll tell him he forced my hand, and I intend to take a lover Thursday night before he has a chance to process this. I'll lay it on thick about it being just sex, a bit of unemotional fun. I'm sorry, Lucas, I'll have to lie a bit there. If he wants to prove his love for me, he'll let me do it. I reckon I have a 70% chance of him saying yes right there and then. What do you think so far?" Lucas silently put the odds much lower than this but wasn't about to say it. He put his odds of scoring this much lower than 50%, but what the hell, it was the thrill of the chase that mattered. He reckoned he could bet her once with zero risk, but many more times, and the risk of discovery and being sacked for having sex with a subordinate would rise exponentially. Why do it more than once? He'd done this before and realized he'd already had 90% of the fun. But by maximizing the chances of Emily succeeding, he might get the last 10%. "If I was your husband, at this point, I would at least demand an open marriage," Lucas remarked, a glint of cynicism in his eye. "Well, he can forget that. I don't share. If he insists, I will back down straight away. Him taking another woman would end our marriage. That can't happen. You know you have the ultimate weapon to stop him, don't you?" Emily frowned, confused. "What weapon?" "Threaten divorce and him living in the poor house with no access to the kids if he insists on retaliation. I couldn't hurt him like that. Not even as a threat. I have no intention of following through with that. Why not inflict a little pain, Emily? It's his fault after all. If he'd gone along with the threesome idea, we wouldn't be here now, would we?" At this point, Lucas grabbed Emily's hands and looked lovingly into her eyes. "Come on, Emily. You deserve this after 15 years as a dutiful wife and slave to an ungrateful husband and needy kids. You've earned it." Emily looked into Lucas's eyes and felt the warm tingle in her groin. "I suppose so. That's my girl." Lucas smiled. "Well, don't get too excited, Lucas. If at the end of this conversation I even suspect Nathan is not on board, then I give in completely." "Fair enough," Lucas replied, though there was a hint of frustration in his voice. "So can you see any flaws in the plan? Can you see how I can possibly lose?" Lucas was firmly thinking about himself as he replied, "No, Emily. It's definitely a no-lose situation." He shook his head at the depth of this woman's delusions while they waited for dessert. After the meal, Lucas walked Emily out to her car and kissed her goodnight. This time, she didn't resist as he cupped and squeezed her breast but responded by pushing her leg into his crotch. She felt the twitching of his manhood through his trousers and almost swooned. Lucas briefly thought about pressing his advantage, but that would spoil the fun. "Okay, lover. I'll book us a room for Thursday night. Can we go to your place? I've never even seen it." "No way," Emily said quickly. "The walls are way too thin, and you'll be screaming way too much. I can assure you of that." On trembling legs, Emily went home to her family. She was even more distracted than normal. At one point, she realized she was alone, and everyone had gone to bed. Consequently, she slept in the next day and only woke just in time to see the kids off. She reminded them she had arranged for Nathan's parents to pick them up for a sleepover that night and checked they had everything they needed. She had arranged the day off. She had to call Lucas at least 5 times to maintain her courage during the day. She knew her major Achilles heel was her inability to lie convincingly. The obvious question Nathan would raise when given her ultimatum was, did she already have someone in mind? In front of a mirror, she practiced saying no. She intended to go out and allow herself to be seduced. Anything else would spur questions she wasn't at all comfortable with. She convinced herself that by remaining cool, calm, and collected, she could pull it off. So here she was, sitting at the kitchen table, waiting to bushwhack her husband, who was due any minute. It was Thursday night, 24 hours short of a much-anticipated event. The kids were overnighting at their grandparents'. Emily was totally ready. She just kept repeating to herself, shock and awe, be firm, can't lose, I deserve this. Nathan walked in at 5:30 p.m., an hour and a half after his new usual time. At 4 p.m. Emily figured he did that because he knew she had the day off. He saw Emily sitting at the kitchen table with a 3/4 empty bottle of wine. She rarely had more than one glass, so Nathan not only knew this was a very special occasion, but that her defenses would be weak. Hey, Emily, what are we celebrating? Did you get that promotion? He asked. We aren't celebrating, darling. At least not yet. Please, sit down. We have to talk. Emily was surprised at herself. Even with the Dutch courage she'd drunk, she was more nervous than she expected. She silently repeated her mantra, shock and awe, be firm, can't lose, I deserve this. Nathan beat her to it. I'm guessing this has something to do with the fact that you've been so distracted for a long time now. Something to do with the fact you've almost totally ignored your family for the last 6 months. Something to do with the fact that apart from 2 glorious weeks, we haven't had sex for 5 months. Nathan, No, don't tell me, Nathan continued, not letting her speak. Let me guess. You really love me, you are looking forward to sharing the kids' graduations, weddings, etc., with me. You can't wait until we attend our grandchildren's christenings and retire to live a life of love and luxury together. Despite all that, because I didn't go along with your plan of sharing you in a sneaky threesome, you intend to cuck me with your lover tonight or tomorrow night. Nathan paused. Alarm bells were screaming in Emily's head. He had just covered the first page and a half of her notes with stunning accuracy. If she'd been thinking rationally, she would have realized that her husband thought much better in a crisis than she did. He proved it the 2 times he'd saved one of their children's lives while she just stood there like a stunned mullet. She was well and truly rattled. In a panic, she reverted to what she knew, her memorized and rememorized speech. But I deserve this, Nathan. It would just be sex, a bit of unemotional fun. Something to spice things up for us, with no interruption from you, Emily said, as she simply rolled into the next part of her speech, completely forgetting it was contingent on Nathan's expected responses. It was the latest addition to the script, being Lucas's suggestion from the night before, and she hadn't memorized it as well as the rest. You can't sleep with other women. I'll divorce you. I could make it so you never see the kids. The courts will take all your salary for house payments, alimony, and child support, Emily said, in an almost robotic tone. Emily stopped as the expression on Nathan's face finally registered in her befuddled mind. It wasn't the look of hurt she'd been steeling herself to resist. It definitely wasn't the look of resigned acceptance she'd dreamed about. It was a look of thunder personified. What's his name, Emily? Nathan demanded, his voice like ice. Whose name? Emily asked, her voice shaky. The name of the stealing bastard who played on the paranoia of a worried middle-aged housewife, a woman terrified of her fading looks. A woman who gave into a low-life prick that played up to her genetic drive to procreate one last time before it's too late. Nathan's voice was shaking with anger. What is his name, Emily? This was so far off all Emily's preparations for this conversation that she was totally incapable of rational thought. She simply responded to her husband's order. Lucas, but he's not like that. Not at all. How long have you been fucking him, Emily? We haven't. Emily stammered. I would never cheat on you. Bullshit, Emily. Nathan shouted. You've been coming home late every single day for 6 months, going out on weekends, and just about totally ignoring your family. Cutting me off emotionally and physically. Was it his idea that you stopped sleeping with me as soon as he started? His idea to invite me for an intimate threesome just so he could cuck me in person? Emily was suffering from a combination of being offended and horrified at the same time. How could she prove Nathan was wrong? No, you've got it all wrong, Nathan. The late nights and weekends were just, he and I talking. Just going to dinner together and talking. I'm calling bullshit, Emily. Nathan glared at her. What about last night, when you came in with your dress all creased and your lipstick all over the place? I know what you look like after you've just had a quickie. Emily's mind reeled as she tried to deny it. No. I haven't cheated, Nathan. I would never cheat. It was just talking dinners and kissing. You have to believe me. I would never cheat. Nathan stopped and rested his face in his hands. Emily had never seen him cry before, and she wasn't about to now. They both sat there, stunned, for several minutes. Nathan finally looked up, but Emily could tell he was trying to hide the pain. It was too late. She knew she had pushed him too far. When he thought his face was no longer giving anything away, he was wrong. Emily was a perceptive woman and knew when his eyes closed to tears. When she saw them, she was horrified that she had caused this amount of pain. This couldn't be happening. She couldn't lose him. Desperately, she marshaled her thoughts and remembered her script's last page, the ultimate, get-out-of-jail-free card. That's it, she thought. She would give up her plans with Lucas. She would capitulate completely. No harm, no foul, right? The situation was salvageable. Unfortunately, once again, Nathan beat her to it. Well done, Emily, he said quietly. Your cheating has killed our marriage and our family. It has killed me. His voice was cold as he stood and slowly shuffled towards the door. Something about the way he said, killed me, set off an extra alarm bell in Emily's head. It sounded so final, so dead. Nathan made it out the door and almost to his car before she recovered enough to chase after him. He hadn't given her a chance to play her get-out-of-jail-free card. He had his hand on the door handle of his car before she was close enough to cry out. But I didn't cheat, Nathan. She yelled. Nathan stopped dead without turning around. He spoke in a deadpan voice. Staying away from your family to spend time with another man while lying to us about the reason, going to dinner with him, kissing him, if that's not cheating, I don't know what is, Emily. It's over. Emily sank to her knees, too shocked to even support herself. She watched as Nathan drove off, too stunned to even cry. Can't lose, she reflexively thought back to her preparations for their confrontation. The only time the dissolution of their marriage should have been discussed was when she issued her hollow threat. It had never occurred to her that Nathan could dissolve it as well. Emily gave herself the luxury of feeling sorry for herself for a little over an hour. The knowledge that she had perhaps terminally screwed up a really good thing was just too big a deal to handle. She shoved it forcibly into the background. But there was another big worry in her heart. Nathan's words as he left, but more importantly, his demeanor, had set off all sorts of alarm bells in her head. For the first time, she worried about the effect her well-planned, not to mention manipulative, ultimatum had on her husband, a man she knew lived for her and his family. She was terrified that he may harm himself. Would he? She had stated plainly what they both knew: in the event of a divorce, he would lose custody of the children and lose most of his pay and assets. They both knew of couples where the ex-wife refused to let the husband see his kids, supported by the pro-feminist court system. Would he contemplate harming himself? Yes, panic said in her mind. There was no answer on Nathan's cell phone. She called his parents to see if he was there. He had been, but was now gone. They were confused. Nathan had only stayed a little while, then left after hugging all three of the children. Emily jumped into her car and drove around to every bar she could think of in the area, looking for his car. She was so distracted that she ran out of fuel and had to call her dad to bring her a jerry can. He saw she was in Northwest fit state to drive, so he took her home. Once there, she broke down and told her parents that Nathan had left her. She could see the hurt in her mother's eyes. Her father's words left nothing to the imagination regarding what he thought of his son-in-law. Eventually, Her mother conceded the logic of Emily waiting at home and dropped her back to her car. Emily went home, and in the wee small hours, fell asleep on the couch. The nightmares finally woke her at 7 a.m. before she could recover from the grogginess. The panic hit again. She feverishly checked her phone for messages. There were none. She dialed Nathan's cell. It went straight to the message bank, like it was turned off or flat. After all, his charger was right next to hers on the kitchen counter. She rang his work only to be told he hadn't shown. She rang the police, but when she told them why her husband had left, they said she was on her own. By this time, it was 8 a.m., so she got Nathan's address book and phoned every friend she could find a number for. Everyone said they hadn't seen him. She then spent the entire day driving to every possible place she could think of, returning to the house every 2 hours or so to see if Nathan's car was there. It never was, and his cell continually went to message bank. The only time reality impinged on her frantic but pointless activity was when a message arrived on her phone. It was a simple one from Lucas High. Room 77. 6 p.m. Emily's soul did a somersault. The feeling was worse than hearing fingernails scrape down a chalkboard. She buried that feeling deep down, as she knew what it meant. The next phone call was from Nathan's parents. They still hadn't heard anything and wanted to know what to do with the kids. Emily asked them to look after them until further notice. Returning home, Emily sat on the couch and cried and cried. She must have slept on the couch again, as she woke with a start at 3:30 a.m. She wept again, as the now familiar hopelessness washed over her. She tried to picture Nathan's face, but she couldn't. She knew then, with an illogical certainty, that Nathan was dead. She felt insanity beckoning, but she buried that thought, too. With dread, Emily got back in her car. As she did, she noticed her cell on the passenger seat where she had left it. There was one message from her eldest child and 6 from Lucas. She listened to the single one, "I miss you, Mom." She ignored the 6 from Lucas. Emily spent the time until about 10 a.m. driving around the possible local suicide spots, looking for Nathan's car, bridges, ravines, any place out of the way where he could have parked his car and put a hose on the tailpipe. Nothing. Desperate, Emily rang his folks again, but still no news from them. She called all his friends again. This time, the call to Nathan's oldest friend, actually an old boss of his, gave her the suspicion that he wasn't being totally honest with her. She looked up his address and decided to drive past his house to see if she could spot Nathan's car. He lived in quite an affluent neighborhood. She found the house, but there was no sign of Nathan. As she drove away, her eyes were drawn to a distinctive Toyota 3 doors down. It was Lucas's car, parked outside another flash-looking house along with many others. Suddenly, the idea of getting some comfort from a man who was, above all, her friend, appealed to her. She parked and walked up the path to the front door. The sounds of muted chatter inside told her there was a Saturday afternoon party going on. Beside the door was a panel flush with the wall, with a security keypad, bell push, and intercom button. She pressed the button, and the door was answered by the general manager of her company. "Hello, Emily." "Isn't it?" he said. "Yes, Mr. Turner, I saw Lucas Whitmore's car outside. Could I speak to him, please?" "Of course, Emily." "Would you like to come in?" he asked. Emily thought of her 2-day-old clothes and haggard look. "No, thank you, sir. I'll wait here if that's okay with you." "Sure, I'll get him for you." A little over a minute later, Lucas came through the door. He took one look at Emily, then looked around to make sure they weren't being observed. He deliberately shut the door, took Emily in his arms, pressed her against the wall, and kissed her. Emily was torn between her need for comfort and her need to blame someone for her desperate predicament. The human craving for comfort won out with a compromise. She broke the kiss and just hugged him desperately. "What happened last night, Emily? Where were you?" Lucas asked, his voice full of concern. "Oh, Lucas, it's terrible. Nathan came home Thursday night, and it was like he knew everything. He accused me of cheating on him. I told him we had only talked, been out to dinner a few times, and kissed, but I could tell he didn't believe me. He knew what I was going to say. He even knew I was going to tell him that I planned to have sex with you last night. I think he may have gone somewhere and done something stupid. No one's seen him since Thursday. At that point, the door opened again, and a furious-looking woman stormed out. "You, bitch," she shouted. "Is this what you were doing while I was waiting to move up here? We moved to get away from all this bullshit. You promised never again." At this, she lost it and went for Lucas's face with her fingernails. He put his arms up to protect himself purely by reflex. Emily grabbed the screaming woman to protect her friend, but the angry woman, seeing an unprotected target, swung around and with a tremendous backhand knocked Emily against the wall of the house. Emily's back inadvertently pressed the intercom button, and briefly her cry of pain was heard in the foyer. She slid slowly to the ground, stunned. The formidable woman returned to trying to get through Lucas's defenses. Suddenly, the big boss came out the door and gently but firmly grabbed the flailing woman's arms. "Come now, Mrs. Whitmore, violence isn't the answer," he said, keeping her back. "That woman has been messing around with my husband." "Yes, I heard," the woman replied bitterly. "But there are more civilized ways of sorting problems out than murder." He looked from Lucas to Emily and back. "You too, my office, 9 Sunday." He took Mrs. Whitmore's arm and led her back inside, closing the door behind him. Lucas let out a sob and bolted for his car, leaving Emily still slumped on the ground, suffering from severe mental overload. She finally summoned the mental energy to go home. She rang her mom, who, when she heard what a terrible state Emily was in, convinced her father to pick her up and bring her to her childhood home. She cried all night and slept most of the next day before crying all night again. At 11 a.m. Sunday, the general manager of Emily's company met with his HR manager. "So, what do you want to do, boss? I can't really do anything until I get her side of the story. Plus, I promised Mrs. Whitmore that I wouldn't fire her husband until she made up her mind what she wants to do. I know she's taken the kids and gone to her mother's place. We can't fire Mrs. Brown for cause until we get her story, can we?" "No, not really. But she wasn't here today or Thursday and hasn't run in sick. If we haven't heard from her by the close of business tomorrow, she's in breach of her contract and essentially fires herself." "Good. That sounds much cleaner. Do you believe his story that they never had sex, just kissed and had intimate conversations? Who cares, boss? It's still cheating, however you look at it." "Yes, you're right. Why can't people just be satisfied with what they have?" The HR manager shrugged her shoulders and left. By Sunday evening, Emily had recovered enough to ring the in-laws to check on the children. She thought she had the strength to see the kids now but didn't want to face Nathan's parents. She couldn't stand the thought that their son might be dead and she was the cause. Emily couldn't stand the thought that their son might be dead and she was the cause. She would ad-lib a way of getting them to drop the children off without facing the music. Shocked is just not a strong enough word to describe how Emily felt when Nathan's mother told her all 3 kids had no wish to see her, and if she came over, they would call the police. Emily didn't recover in time to say anything before the connection was broken. She woke up, very confused, on the kitchen floor, stiff and sore. She realized with shock that she had wet herself. She staggered to the bathroom and had a long shower. As she was drying herself, the setting sun caught her attention. It had been just after sunset when she had made that phone call. She rushed downstairs and looked at her cell phone screen. It was 6 p.m. Tuesday. She had been out of it for nearly 24 hours. "What the hell," she muttered to herself. One of the advantages of her mental collapse was that she felt fresher than she had in days. Her face was flushed with renewed energy, and she used her resurgent strength to resolve she would take back control of her life. The sudden realization that Nathan could be dead tried to bring her down, but she managed to suppress it. One of the sources of her strength had always been her children. She decided to go to Nathan's parents' house unannounced and bring them back. Arriving at Nathan's parents' place, she was surprised to see her parents' car there. As she pulled up, they were just coming out the door. They grabbed her and hustled her back to her car. Emily resisted, screaming, "I want to see my children." Her father told her they weren't there, and then told her to follow them back to their place, which Emily did. When she walked in the door, her mom was putting the kettle on. "Where are my children?" Emily demanded. "Calm down, Emily. They're fine. Nathan has them," her father said. Emily froze. "You saw Nathan? He's alive." "Of course, we just spent an hour talking to him." "Where is he?" she asked, feeling panic rise. Her father looked at her mother, and they both seemed uncomfortable. He's taking the kids to meet some people. Who? Emily pressed. Her mother interrupted impatiently. Emily, Nathan told us his version of what happened last week. I must say it was much more believable than that fiction you told us. We're both very disappointed in you. Not to mention ashamed. Emily felt like she had been slapped in the face. What were you thinking, girl? Emily bowed her head and remained silent as her mother continued. To answer your question, after you gave him no choice but to leave, Nathan went back to work and met an old friend. Oh God, not Debbie, Emily gasped. Sophia Martinez, her father said, his voice full of contempt. She was the daughter of the guy who owned Nathan's company. She was an ex-girlfriend of his and had been a minor source of worry for you for years, despite his reassurances. We all know they only separated because she was sent off to an exclusive business college far away. And now, she's recently divorced. The look between her parents confirmed Emily's worst fears. When Nathan realized how badly you had treated him, he sought comfort from someone who actually appreciated him. He's been staying with her since. Wait, no. Emily gasped. He can't do that. He has to give me a chance. Her mother just shook her head. From what he told us, Emily, he gave you plenty of chances over the last 6 months. He said he was devastated when you lied to him about working extra to get a promotion, all the while cheating with another man. Who can blame him? I did not cheat, Emily protested, her voice cracking. Her father snapped. Cheating doesn't just mean intercourse, Emily. It means emotional betrayal. And I fully agree with him. I'll tell you, if your mother did that, she'd have gravel rash on her ass from hitting the path out front. Nathan told us how you came home last Tuesday with your lipstick all smeared. Sounds like cheating to me. Emily collapsed, her mind reeling. I didn't mean it. I was going to totally give in if he wasn't willing to go along with it. He never gave me the chance. Her parents exchanged disappointed looks. We know what you were planning, Emily, her father said. You wrote notes. Detailed, cold, calculating notes about your schemes to manipulate him into agreeing. Honestly, how could you embarrass us like that? Emily couldn't find the words. She was speechless, utterly humiliated. I can't believe you threatened to never let him see his kids and send him to the poorhouse, her father added. I didn't mean it. Emily pleaded, but it was no use. Her parents had made their judgment. They gave her time to think. The anger was mounting inside her, but she could no longer deny that she had brought this all on herself. So you're betraying me, too? Emily asked, her voice filled with disbelief. Her father couldn't help himself. You started it, Emily, he muttered, shaking his head in disappointment. What did you think would happen? Emily didn't respond. She was too broken to argue. The truth was clear now, her marriage was over, and there was no going back. Thank you for watching this compelling story. What do you believe Emily could have done differently to save her marriage? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more engaging narratives.